Til 2:30 sender vi nu en koncert fra Buenos Aires i Argentina. Det er rockmusikkens matadorer, der hermed afslutter en 6 ugers verdensturné til fordel for Amnesty International. Det er 40 år siden, at menneskerettighedserklæringen blev underskrevet. Først en indledning med Morten Olsen fra Køln.
God aften. Jo, det er den rigtige kanal, jeg stiller ind på. Det, der følger, drejer sig ikke om fodbold, men derimod om rock af bedste slags. Men egentlig drejer det sig om noget, som er meget vigtigere end både rock og fodbold, nemlig menneskerettighederne. Og efterfølgende koncertsformål er der blandt andet også at gøre opmærksom på en organisation, der bedre end nogen anden kæmper for menneskerettighederne, nemlig Amnesty International. Netop i dag er det 40 år siden, at FN vedtog verdenserklæringen om menneskerettighederne. Desværre er det de færreste regeringer, der følger spillereglerne. Ja, der er stadigvæk mange mennesker, som ikke kender deres egne rettigheder. Det har Amnesty International forsøgt at rette op på gennem en lang række aktiviteter her i 40 år. Der er skabt stor opmærksomhed omkring menneskerettighederne, og Amnesty, mange tusinde frivillige medlemmer, har ved utrætteligt arbejde fået mange uskyldige mennesker fri fra fængsling, henrettelse og tortur. Efterfølgende koncerts sangere og musikere
accidentally stuck open on a police motorcycle and recorded on a dictabelt at Dallas Police Headquarters. Critics argue the dictabelt recorded the sounds of 4 gunshots, one more than Oswald could have fired. Were the sounds the actual shots? Congress hired acoustic experts to find out. They set up an elaborate test with microphones placed strategically in Dealey Plaza. They recorded the sounds of rifle shots from the 6th floor of the school book depository and from the grassy knoll. Comparing those shots with the sounds on the dictabelt, they confirmed that the dictabelt actually had recorded the sounds of 4 gunshots, not 3. Then, with a close study of the physical layout of Dealey Plaza, they calculated the unique echo pattern that would be found if a shot had been fired from the grassy knoll. The result was this acoustic fingerprint. This pattern of 26 distinct echoes matched point for point the echoes on the police recording. It led to a dramatic conclusion.
With a probability of 95% or better, there was indeed a shot fired from the grassy knoll.
Challenges to this acoustic finding came from some unusual sources. The most important came from Steve Barber, a rock drummer living in a small town in Ohio.
I didn't have access to the tape recordings themselves at the point where I was, trying to study them. And July of 1979, Gallery magazine put out this special issue on the assassination of President Kennedy. And in it included a paper record of the recorded gunshot evidence. And if you overlook the narration, you can, pretty much hear what they're talking about. Well, anyway, I just played this thing to death, just trying to hear, the gunshots and hear for myself what they really said was 95% evidence of a conspiracy.
Steve Barber alone heard something all the experts missed, the barely audible sound of Sheriff Decker at headquarters telling policemen on the scene, hold everything secure. The stuck-open microphone, which was on Channel 1, had somehow picked up Sheriff Decker's words from Channel 2, a phenomenon known as crosstalk. And back at police headquarters, the dictabelt recorded what the microphone had picked up.
I found that when Sheriff Decker is speaking, his voice is coming through the open microphone during the sound impulses that the acoustic experts said were gunshots. But he didn't make his statement until a minute and a half after the assassination had already occurred, so those cannot be gunshots simply because of that.
In 1982, the National Academy of Sciences confirmed the crosstalk Steve Barber discovered, and thus concluded the acoustic evidence of a fourth shot coming from the grassy knoll was invalid.
You still hear it?
Yeah.
This left Congress with no scientific evidence of conspiracy. However, some congressional experts believe the crosstalk might be due to a recording mix-up on the dicta belt. And they point out that the Academy did not account for the acoustic fingerprint of the grassy knoll shot. Chief Counsel Blakey.
You can reconstruct an acoustical fingerprint for each of the four shots. We did it for the shot from the grassy knoll. If it was to be done for the other three shots, it would either corroborate what we did or tend to undermine it. I would like to see what a fingerprint, acoustical fingerprint analysis of the other three shots indicates.
So, if there was a grassy knoll gunman, as eye and ear witnesses testified, the best scientific analysis available today of the photographic and acoustic evidence does not yet prove it. The one remaining category of doubt relates to what should be the best evidence, the body of the slain president. Controversial evidence about the body of the president has been the focus of a new critical approach developed by David Lifton. His investigation led to a thoroughly researched book published after Congress re-examined the assassination. Lifton found new evidence about the autopsy and new evidence from eyewitnesses whom he filmed. This led him to a provocative conclusion.
What is very clear is that the president's body did not make an uninterrupted journey from Dallas to Bethesda. It began in a large ceremonial casket. It was placed in that casket by Aubrey Reich of the O'Neill Funeral Home.
I helped put President Kennedy's body in a bronze ceremonial casket on November 22nd, 1963 at Parkland Memorial Hospital.
He wrapped the body in sheets. It was placed in the casket.
The bronze casket was placed on board Air Force One. This was not the casket from which Kennedy's body was removed by Bethesda autopsy technician Paul O'Connor.
We opened the pinkish gray shipping casket, and there was a gray body bag, zipped shut. We unzipped the body bag, and the president's body was lifted out of the body bag.
Reich told Lifton that Kennedy's body was not in a body bag when it left Dallas. How could he be so certain?
I remember picking him up. I was one that had the blood on my shirt and everything from the body. If he'd been in a crash bag, you couldn't have got any blood on him because it's a sealed bag.
Was the large bronze casket empty when it was unloaded at Bethesda, as Lifton argues? The Secret Service refused to comment for Nova. But an Air Force officer claims the body could not have been switched because the casket was in his view for all but 5 minutes of the journey from Dallas to Bethesda. But after the body arrived at Bethesda Naval Hospital for the autopsy, many problems followed. The autopsy should have determined how the gunshots killed Kennedy and where the bullets entered and exited his body. Dr. James Humes, a Naval Hospital pathologist, not a forensic expert, was in charge. This was his first autopsy involving gunshot wounds. It resulted in many irregularities. He did not examine Kennedy's clothing to locate and confirm entry and exit wounds. He did not dissect the neck wound to trace the bullet's path through the body. He did not locate the wounds with reference to fixed body landmarks, and he apparently made errors of several inches in drawings locating the wounds. He did not properly examine the brain, which disappeared some years later and has not been found since. He didn't realize there was a bullet wound in the front of the neck until he contacted the Dallas doctors the following day. By then, the body had been removed and re-examination was impossible. And finally, he burned his original autopsy notes before they were made public. Compounding these problems, the autopsy descriptions of the wounds were substantially different from the way the doctors in Dallas described them, as David Lifton explains.
We have two groups of doctors seeing the body, which is evidence. Their observations are 6 hours apart. What did they see in each area of the body? In the area of the neck, President Kennedy suffered a wound in Dallas, which was described as an entry wound.
If Kennedy was shot from behind, the wound on the front of his neck had to be an exit wound. But that's not what Nurse Audrey Bell, on duty in the emergency room that day, recalls.
It looked small and round, like an entry wound, instead of larger, like an exit wound could often look.
The wound was about 5 millimeters or a 1/4 inch across, the size of a pencil, right at the throat, at the Adam's apple. That wound, Dr. Perry made a tracheotomy through.
Lifton claims he was told by the Dallas doctor who made the tracheotomy that his incision through the neck wound was smooth and less than half the width described by Dr. Humes, the autopsy doctor.
More significantly, he describes it as having widely gaping, irregular edges. So the inconsistency here is that we have a widening of a wound, which in Dallas was thought to be a bullet's entry. At Bethesda, in the autopsy report, their conclusion is that this is the exit for a bullet, which entered from behind.
The records on Kennedy's head wound, the one that killed him, also seem to be inconsistent, both in terms of size and location. 6 of the Dallas doctors, including the neurosurgeon who pronounced Kennedy dead, said the cerebellum was visible through the hole in the skull. But according to the autopsy, the wound was not at the bottom and back of his head, where the cerebellum is located. In fact, in this drawing, we see only a small entry wound at this location. The drawing, based on an autopsy photo of the back of Kennedy's head, was made public by Congress and seems inconsistent with this drawing showing the size and location of what critics point out looks like a large exit wound. The drawing was approved by Dr. McClellan, one of the attending physicians in Dallas.
Based on the absence of any evidence coming from the Dallas end of the line that there were rear entries on the body, I conclude that President Kennedy was shot from the front.
This document led Lifton to conclude the wounds had been altered. It's a report written by 2 FBI agents who attended the autopsy. Their report states it was apparent that surgery of the head area was done before the autopsy started. Had surgery been done in Dallas?
No, there was no surgery done on the president's head. The president was only treated in the trauma room, in the emergency room.
This autopsy sketch done in Bethesda shows the head wound almost 5 times larger than the description given by a doctor in the Dallas medical team, further evidence to Lifton of an altered wound. If the wound was altered, Lifton believes it was to get access to Kennedy's brain.
The brain had the bullets. That's the reason for getting access to the brain. The reason for altering the body is that the body is the diagram of the shooting, and it's the most important evidence in the case. I infer the purpose of doing it from the effect it has. Someone wants to make it appear in the evidence that President Kennedy was struck twice from behind from the direction of the school book depository building, and to obliterate any evidence of frontal entry. That's my opinion about what these facts mean.
The autopsy doctor refused to be interviewed by Nova, but 4 of the doctors who treated Kennedy in Dallas agreed to come to the National Archives to examine photos of the president's body at the time of his autopsy. Perhaps they could corroborate or disprove Lifton's explosive claims of altered wounds. Would their recollection of the wounds match the photos they would be seeing for the first time?
Let me show you, to my best recollection, what the wound looked like to me that day in Trauma Room 1.
Before each doctor looked at the photos, he described the wounds he had seen back in 1963.
I could see the president's head wound quite well, and I was probably looking into a wound that was on the lateral or the side part of the head and the back part of the head.
It would be this portion of the head right here.
As I remember, it's like this, that there was a big wound, big deficit in his skull and the temporal parietal area.
Would you come in, please?
The examination of the 52 color and black and white autopsy photos by the doctors for Nova was unprecedented. Special permission had to be obtained from the Kennedy family to arrange this. Cameras were barred from the room in which the doctors looked at the pictures. Each took as much time as he felt necessary to examine them, from 30 minutes to a full hour.
I would have to say, honestly, in looking at these photos, they're pretty much as I remember President Kennedy at the time, except for that little incision that seems to be coming down in the parietal area. On looking at the photographs, I could envision that an incision might have been made in order to pull the scalp back to expose this bone to make a photograph of that area.
Perhaps this explains the surgery to the head area the FBI mentioned.
I don't see evidence of any alteration of his wound in these pictures from what I saw in the emergency room.
And nothing that I've seen would make me think it'd been changed from what happened at that day.
The tracheostomy incision, which was shown on several of the photographs I examined, looks exactly the same size and the same configuration as it did when Dr. Perry and I did that incision. Now, I find no discrepancy between the wounds as they're shown very vividly in these photographs and what I remember very vividly. That it was a very large...
But do the doctors' assertions that they saw no altered wounds clear up the issue? The drawing suggests what many of the photos examined by the doctors in Nova show, a large wound about this size and location. But what about this photo, which shows what appears to be only a small entry wound in the back of Kennedy's head? Dr. McClellan speculates.
The pathologist has taken this loose piece of scalp, which is hanging back this way in most of the pictures, exposing this large wound, and has pulled the scalp forward to take a picture. Naturally, the scalp appears to be in its normal state, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of wound in the area where I had drawn the picture that showed this large hole.
But doesn't this large wound suggest a shot from the front, as Lifton argues? This drawing, made for Congress, suggests how a small rear entry wound could have created the large wound. Finally, if the large wound was really in this part of the head, why did most of the doctors note back in 1963 that they had seen a specific part of the brain called the cerebellum?
I did say cerebellum in my first official report, and the cerebellum ordinarily is in a posterior part. And here I knew very well that the wound was more anterior than that, but there was a portion of the brain that looked like it had a stalk, and it was convoluted to look like what I thought was cerebellum.
I said that I thought perhaps part of the cerebellum was missing, and that shows how even a trained observer can make an error in a moment of urgency.
In fact, the Dallas doctors were caught up in an emergency life-saving effort. They were not doing an autopsy or trying to describe the wounds.
We simply were performing the tracheostomy and felt that it was not an appropriate thing to do at the time to examine the head wound.
How would you do that with the widow there, the President of the United States, who was dead? What's the, no one thought about the morbidity of doing examination at that time. That would have been a little sacrilegious, I think, under the circumstances.
Their visit to the National Archives revealed that the doctor's original observations in Dallas were done with haste and some imprecision. It should be noted that in previous interviews with journalists, some of their comments seemed to support Lifton's claims of altered wounds. But they made those comments before they saw the color photos at the National Archives. With With all the contradictions and unresolved doubts, will we ever come to a final, undisputed conclusion? Josiah Thompson.
In a homicide case, you get a convergence of the evidence after a while. There may be discrepancies in detail, but on the whole, things come together. With this case, it's now 25 years. Things haven't gotten any simpler. They haven't come together. If anything, they become more and more problematical, more and more mysterious. That just isn't the way a homicide case develops.
And the night comes again to the circle-studded sky. The stars settle slowly, in loneliness they lie.
It is understandable that shock, grief, and doubt elevated the tragic event of November 22nd, 1963 to a national obsession.
But they all glow brighter from the brim.